So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to Leah and my presentation on It Takes a Village, a community-based approach to animal sheltering. And that's me on the, left. My name is Louiza Chan. I'm one of the Best Friends staffers. I'm the South Central Regional Strategist, and I'm based out in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Long. I am the Senior Specialist with the South Central team, and I'm out of New Orleans. All right, so as Louisa has mentioned, there will be some audience participation today. We are going to be utilizing the platform Slido. You guys, this is opt-in, so if you do not want to utilize the platform, you absolutely don't have to, but if you do, we're going to have some fun with Slido today. So let's go ahead and get started. We know that pets and people are undeniably connected. And in order to be able to support the pets in our community, we also have to support the people in it as well. So through this first section of our presentation, we're going to be exploring what the relationship with our community looks like and what is our perception of the community and the community's perception of us. Let's start by looking at the animal welfare ecosystem. You can see that the two big parts of it are animal welfare organizations, such as everyone in this room, and the community. And our relationship with the community does impact the flow of what happens at our animal shelter. So when we see a less than healthy relationship with the community and vice versa, what we're going to see is more intakes because we don't have services in place to help us with diverting intakes. And we're also going to see an increase in non-life outcomes because we don't have as many adopters coming to our shelter because there's this negative perception potentially of the community and because we don't have as much support when it comes to programs such as community cat programs. Instead, we want to work on a system where we're always going to have intakes. But we want there to be less intakes because we're providing services such as owner surrender counseling so that we can keep pets and their people together, or putting information out in the community so people know what to do when they find a healthy litter of kittens outside. They're going to go ahead and leave those kittens with mom because they're going to care. Mom's going to care for the kittens much better than we can, or what to do when you find a stray dog. And with that, we're going to experience less intakes, which is going to put us in less of a reactive place and more of a proactive position, which means we're going to be seeing less non-life outcomes because we're going to have less animals coming into our building, which means more bandwidth to get animals out into live outcomes. We're also going to see us growing out our adoption network and once again, more support with things such as community cat programs, because we know while we do have transports and rescue that we can't transport our way out of the intakes that we are experiencing. What we'll also see is growth in our volunteer department, foster department, and donations, which helps us once again grow out bandwidth, which allows us to save even more lives.
Okay, so we're going to do this audience participation thing. The first thing we're going to do is point your phone at the QR code, and we would like to hear what words have you heard people use to describe shelters. And text your answer in there. Hopefully the tech will work and the answers will pop up on the screen. Pound, yep. Sad, that's a lot of pound. Dog slaughter, scary. Overcrowded, absolutely. Killing center, a lot of negative words. I'm gonna give this a couple more seconds. My tax money, I like that. We're gonna go into that a bit later. Murderers. Very true. Lots of dog jails, sad. Okay, I'm not seeing any positive words. This is sad. Well, hopefully there are some positive words. Lovely room of death. And then we're just not putting it together and we're just all a little bit bitter. But adoptions, yay! Great. Okay, I know this is gonna go forever. I'm gonna flip to my next slide. Okay, so here are some of the myths that we've heard from what our shelter partners have told us. You're right, they are just dog catchers. I mean, what do you really expect if Disney decide to call the animal services people, the dog catchers in 101 Dalmatians, right? Or they just kill everything, or that they purposely put animals in their harm's way. And a lot of the other myths, like they're too lazy to find other options, so they just euthanize everything. I think the really painful one that we always hear, or sometimes hear, is that we don't care. I mean, we're all in it because we care, but why are they telling us that we don't care? So we're going to explore some of this a little bit later, and then we're going to do the flip side and go, what are some words that people have used in the sheltering world to describe the community? Same thing, QR code, and let's see what everyone says. I like the caring. I'm liking some of that positive stuff in there. It's a little bit less sad than the other slide.
Breeders, irresponsible.
Oh, yes, irresponsible, undeserved. There's something I don't understand. Uneducated, disengaged, ignorant. Don't care about the animals. Oh, that's getting a big one.
Yeah, it does.
Crazy animal people. Okay. Wow. All right, let's have a look. We've got some interesting ones on there. Foster, yay, not cat friendly. Oh, okay. So, some of the common things that floats around the sheltering circles are things like, you don't deserve this pet, or you don't make enough money, so you shouldn't have a pet, or you're too uneducated, or you didn't finish high school, why should you be a pet, or they just can't be trusted. And then think about a lot of especially in the South, we talk a lot about dog fighters. You know, we often hear, oh, those people just want their dogs for dog fighting. But if you think about it, really, why would someone go into the effort of going to the shelter, give you their ID card, let you write down the address and a phone number and the name, that you can search them on police records to get a dog for dog fighting? It's way easier to just go to the mates on the road or go on Nextdoor or on Facebook or whatever and just grab a free to good home dog, right? And for other people who are only surrendering, like they don't care about the pets. Why are they not taking it with them? But honestly, have you noticed that there is a bit of similarity between the myths that we think of the community and what the community think of us? There's a lot of similarities, and we're going to explain why in a little bit.
So often we enter this us versus them dynamic whenever we're in situations where problems arise. And in this case, it's us versus the community, when really we came from that same community. We are part of that community. And this us versus them isn't benefiting anyone. And in truth, the shelter isn't the problem. The people aren't the problem. The problem is access to resources and access to information. And this is a problem that both groups face. So on the shelter side with resources, we know that when it comes to funding from the government, the shelter is the very last on the list. That means we are underfunded, we are understaffed, and we're across the board, under-resourced, which makes life-saving the barriers that we see a little bit more difficult, right? And then on the community side, most shelters are going to experience their highest intake in underserved communities. So communities that are going to have less access to resources, where they might experience things called resource deserts, where they might not have a vet that is accessible to them in that community at all, let alone one that is affordable for them. And that goes with other resources beyond veterinary care, other things that could help them with being able to support their pets. On the other side, with access to resources, we know that historically, animal shelters have been very siloed from one another, which means we weren't able to share information to start to establish the proven practices that we know today. We've definitely gotten a lot better with sharing information. I mean, we're all here right now, but there's still a lot more work to do and more people that we can reach with that. With access to information, informational deserts exist too. Think about how I grew up in Chicago, and where I grew up, no one talked about heartworm prevention. So when I moved down to Atlanta and the New Orleans, and I was like, whoa, this is a whole thing. It wasn't because I didn't care about my pets. I didn't lack that information because I didn't care. It's just because that was not present in my community at that time. And what I like to keep in mind is we don't know what we don't know until we know, and then we know. all the things that make everyone in this room professionals is something that you had to learn at some point. You had the opportunity to learn that. And we can be that learning point when the community comes into our doors and gives us a call or an email. And that's how we want it to operate. So let's think about changing mindsets, ours, and of course the community's perception of us too. As we think about that, I also want to just acknowledge, we need to acknowledge the history of how animal welfare has interacted with the community and how in many communities we have taken animals from those low-income areas and adopted them out to more affluent communities, and how those low-income areas often receive many fines, and there is a distrust that was built. And that distrust can be mutual, and that's something that we need to work to rebuild, and we get to take that first step. The relationship between the community and the shelter is a symbiotic one. And we can be each other's greatest resources in filling those resource gaps. So in order to fill those gaps of information and resources, we need to work on cultivating those resources within our community. Let's talk about the first steps. The community in and of itself is one of our biggest resources. So we need to work on building that relationship with these building blocks. I always think about transparency, engagement, and addressing needs. And all three of these are interconnected. The first step is always going to be transparency. In order for the community to help us, they need to know how they can help us. We need to communicate what our needs are. We need to share what our numbers are, be transparent. We need to tell the community when we are full and when we need our help. With that is going to come more engagement because they know what's happening. They're not making up their own narrative. Or with a lot of community members, they might just have this out of sight, out of mind mentality. If we are not talking, then they just aren't thinking about us. And sometimes that can be even worse than creating your own narrative. We want to be at the front of people's minds. Addressing needs also goes both ways. We want to listen to what the needs of the community are. We want to look through our data and see what are the reasons why animals are coming into our shelter? What are the reasons for returns, and start addressing those needs. So how do we communicate with our community as we're building this up? We really want to move more towards a client services model, meaning we don't want just a one and done reaction with our community members. We want them to keep coming back again and again and maintain that client relationship with them. What I like to keep in mind is when someone comes into our shelter and they leave, if they have a negative experience, they could tell 10 or more people. Whereas if they have a positive experience, they're going to tell 5 or more people. And word of mouth is the most effective means of marketing. So when someone leaves through my shelter doors, I want to make sure that they have a positive experience because they might come back and adopt, or their friends might hear about it and choose to adopt from us, or they might volunteer, donate. All these different things can just come from that one interaction. So I want to make sure it's a positive one. Some other things we're going to be keeping in mind is when we're having conversations with the community, we're going to be very solution-oriented. So if someone's surrendering a pet, I'm going to focus on what's going on that's causing them to surrender the pet and figure out if there's resources or information I can offer to address those concerns. The same thing goes with adoptions. I want to set them up for success so they have all the information they need or know that they can come back to me so that they're more likely to keep that pet, or I can make a better match in the future. With that means creating non-judgmental spaces. People are just going to be more likely to be honest in our dialogues with each other if they don't feel judgment coming to us. People don't want to have an emotional conversation about why they're surrendering their pet if they feel judged. And we really need to get to the heart of the matter so we can provide tailored solutions. Consistency is also important. We need to be consistent with the messaging from our staff, our volunteers, but also on our website and social media. It's really important that we are community positive in the way we're communicating outward. I think a lot about social media posts, for instance. We don't want to go on social media and talk about, well, this dog was surrendered because the owner was moving, and maybe we wouldn't do the same in that situation, but that owner is probably following our page, and they, from that interaction, are having a negative experience. And they're going to tell their friends and family about what they experience. And on top of that, negative marketing does not do as well as positive marketing. When we doom scroll, we do get worn out and tired. We're much more likely to have consistent followers when we're focusing on positives. And also when we're marketing pets for adoption, we need to focus on that pet's personality. And that's what's going to get them into a home.
So Leah talked about how we should be transparent, solution-focused, and non-biased when we're communicating with the community. Now let's have a quick look at who in the community are important to us to help us get to where we need to get to, apart from the shelter people aside. So who are our community stakeholders, and what are their goals and the motivators, which could be completely different to ours. And then the most important thing, how do they actually align to ours? The first lot of community stakeholders are your all-important policymakers. What motivates policymakers? Policymakers are people like, your mayor, your chief administrative officer, your police jury, your politicians, the president of the United States, you name it, you know what I mean. The people who are going to decide how much money you're gonna have next year to operate your shelter, the people who are gonna decide if they allow an ordinance change, the people who are gonna decide if you can renovate your shelter, the people who can decide if you're gonna have a new shelter. What do you know who those people are serving your shelter in your area? And do you know what motivates them? So yes, winning the election, it's wonderful. So what motivates policy makers? Well, not all politicians and policy maker people are animal people. I would love for them to all to be, but truthfully, not all of them are. All of them are people. That's why they get into that job. And all of them want to care about, well, they should be caring about who their constituents want and what they want to say and pleasing them. So yes, obviously, then that would get them to win the election. The other important part is they often, and probably 99.9% of the time, care about money. So if you know what their motivators are, so dollars and cents and how to save the government money, then that is a great way, a segue to approach them for your ask. So one of the ways that we like to approach talking to that is talking about capacity for care. Both capacity for care for animals, meaning how many animals can you humanely care for given the resources that you have, and also capacity on the human side, where how many animals can you humanely care for the number of staff that you have. And we all know everyone has staffing shortages here. So should you really be caring for that many animals if you only have one cage cleaner in your shelter? The third very important way to try and get segue to getting what you want with the policymakers is using the term dollar per nose. So that is the cost of care for each animal that you have in your shelter. So obviously, the shorter the animal stays, the less you're feeding them, the cheaper that would be. Not saying that we should be euthanizing everything, because that's not what we're in here for, but how can we best get your cheapest or your smallest dollar per nose that supports life-saving and get the animals out faster? So that would be things like putting in different programmings to support life-saving that we will go in a little bit later. One of the other very important things I like to make sure that policymakers know is that animal shelters are not a money-making business. We all know that your reclaim fees and your adoption fees is never, ever, ever enough to cover the cost of keeping your animals in the shelter. So the sooner that they realize that, to stop charging, well, the dog stayed in the shelter for 20 days, so it cost us $300, so the adoption fee should be $300. No one's gonna adopt your dog for $300 at this day and age. The sooner they realize that is not a money-making thing, but they are providing a public health service, they are providing a service for the community, the quicker that your mission and their mission will align and you get what you want. The third thing that is very important to policymakers is resolving complaints. They don't like hearing complaints, but pretty much that's what they get a lot of the time. So one of the things that would be great for shelters to do is to give them solutions that are what you want. So you don't want them to make up stuff because they're not animal people, but you want to tell them, hey, if someone complains about a cat, this is what you should say. Makes their job easier, makes your job easier too, and everything aligns, again, collaboration. So the other piece of the puzzle are vets. We all know that vets are critical in animal shelter. We all need them, basically, be it for looking after your shelter population, be it for spay neuter, be it to give you access to veterinary care. for your community. And also, very importantly, and I think a lot of the times we forget, vets should always have a seat at the leadership table. Because, hey, we're talking about animals here, and they should be part of the decision. There should be the administrative side, the business side, but also the vets should have a say. So we know they're important, but how do we build relationships with veterinarians? This next couple of minutes, we're mainly going to be focusing on shelters who don't have an in-house vet, because we know that not every shelter do. Very blessed if you do, but many of us, especially in Louisiana, don't. And so how are we going to build a stronger relationship with the vets in the area? So the first important thing to build a strong relationship is understanding each other, right? It's like human basic relationship 101. The vets need to understand how shelters work, and you'd be surprised a lot of them don't. We don't get teach that at vet school. And they don't actually know how the shelters work. Their perception of it could be very similar to what the public perceives it when you saw all those words like the dog pound, the jail, the yuck, they're dirty, they're not resourced. And then also keeping in mind with our shelter hats on that vets are still running a business. They still have overheads that you might not be seeing. Yes, we all know that vet bills are very expensive, and especially if you're going through a private veterinarian, but there's nothing quicker to put off a relationship with a vet than telling them that, well, you are so expensive because you are just in this for the money. Like that would just make them very mad. So mutual understanding and mutual respect, and giving each other chances to understand how we work. Things like go and reach out to your vets in the area. Go and call them and say, hey, come by and look at our shelter. Show that the shelter facility is, you doing your best, and showing that your staff cares just as much as their staff cares for the animals in their vet hospital. So that's really important. And if you're lucky enough to have a vet that does community outreach, get them to go and talk to the other vets, get them to tell the other vets in the private practice or in the private sector what your mission is, and that you are not in there to steal their business. I think that's a very common misconception from the private practices, that we are competing with them. We all know that the people who reach out to low-cost vet clinics, to reach out for your community vet vaccination days, are not really the people who are going to spend $1,000. It's their little jeweled up puppy dog frou-frou at the vet hospital. It's a matter of getting some care or no care at all. So getting them to understand that is very important. And yeah, so important, mutual respect. Have I clicked the page? No, I haven't clicked the page. And things like that.
Perfect. So as we're thinking about cultivating resources, I think collaboration is one of the biggest points, and building out a network of connections. So when we leave today, I really want us to start with thinking about ourselves and what our own connections are, because we have our own network of people, friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, and different types of communities that we are part of. And within that, there are resources that we just may not have identified yet. I remember I was doing a ride along with an officer in a Texas shelter, and we were picking up dogs, and they were talking about how on their weekends, they volunteer with their local church, and they drop off food or meals to people in need. And then she suddenly had the idea of, like, what if we just included pet food along with the human meals? And it can really just be as simple as looking at things that you always have looked at, but in the light of how can this help support my shelter? And really engaging in conversations with those people in your network. Another thing we want to be thinking about is the community as a whole and community stakeholders. So like maybe your aunt, it works at the local pet food store, and every week they get in bags of food, and not all of them are able to go on the floor. Maybe they have some like cosmetic damages where it can't go on the floor, but it's still completely edible, and we could use that at our shelter. Same thing goes for bigger stores like Walmart and Target. And maybe the local fence repair store, we might know someone there, and we can ask if they have extra supplies, they can donate it to us, and we can put a post on social media thanking them from that post, and also marketing their business at the same time. So there's just so many different resources that exist in our community, and it can be as simple as just reaching out and having that ask, but also keeping in mind, by them donating to us, we can make them look good as well, and it can be a mutually beneficial relationship. You also want to be thinking about government resources and national organizations. National organizations such as Best Friends has ongoing grants where shelters and nonprofits can apply to get grants for things such as intake diversion programs. And when I think about government resources, I think a lot about human resources in particular, because the human resources tends to focus their efforts on underserved communities. Same communities that we're usually going to be getting a lot of our intakes from, and they've already developed out resources to help people. In order to help people, in order to help pets, we need to help people. So if we can help make this connection by building our relationship with human services, that can go a long way. If we already know, oh, this homeless shelter is able to take in pets too, or, oh, there's actually a housing program that you can apply for. We know someone, here's their contact information, you can get started this way. We can help build connections that way too. As we get started with cultivating our resources, we also wanted to make sure that we're taking a look at our data, seeing the reasons why, once again, animals are coming in for owner surrenders or pets are being returned. So we know where we need to focus our efforts at and build out resources first. We of course want resources for any reason a pet's coming into our shelter, but it can be good to have a point to focus on, to grow, or figure out areas you need to bolster if you have existing programming. So now we're going to get into community and life-saving programs, and really we're just going to be talking about the importance of your life-saving programming having that community focus.
And of course, one of the most important life-saving programs once your adoption, it's your adoption program once your animal is in the shelter system. And especially community support sheltering. So here I have a video of Shelley Delahousie, the director of Lafayette Animal Shelter, talking about her thoughts about community supported programming.
I don't think the sound is working. Okay. Thoughts.
Whatever. Your choice. I guess skip that and keep talking. I guess.
That's good.
That's okay.
No.
Okay, anyway, there was a video of Shelley talking about how community supported programming is shelter is very important. But one of the key things that she said was that yes, they do see bad people. They absolutely do, but they see way more good than bad, and that they needed the community's help to help them achieve their life-saving goals and actually being their best resource. So how do we get there? One of the key things is trust. I always say assume good intentions. People aren't going to go and spend the time to go and look for an animal or to help you when you call out for help if they don't have good intentions. It's way easier to just ignore everything and pretend they didn't hear than actually step up and help. And then the other thing, apart from good intentions, is putting aside your biases. We all inherently are humans and we're biased, but biases doesn't help adoptions, doesn't help life-saving. So putting that aside and not thinking about that when you are trying to promote life-saving. One of the biggest examples is pages and pages of adoption questionnaires and house visits. And just for fun thing, quick show of hands, who's been denied an adoption here? So there's a good few of us that have denied. I've been denied an adoption. Do I think I deserve the denial? Absolutely not. Do I think I'm a bad person? I don't deserve a pet? I don't think so. And then thinking about it deeper, if I've been denied adoption, what do I think of the organization that denied me? Like, have I ever had bad thoughts about that organization? Say, I don't really like you that much because I think I'm good enough. But really, when you go through the pages and pages of adoption things, when you go through the house visits and all that stuff, who gives you the power to say that to decide that human being sitting over there is a good enough human being for the pet? You don't know that much about them. So what we should be practicing instead is conversational based adoptions. So we should be talking to the people, asking them, hey, what are you looking for? What would suit your family? Do you have bandwidth to take on a more behaviorally challenged animal? Do you have bandwidth to take on a medically challenged pet? You never know. Some people really like those things, and some people don't. And also just not, letting them decide, being transparent and giving them all the resources and say, this is the profile of the animal. Let them decide if they can handle that or not. One of the other things is I always say this is a great time for you to then pitch the animals that might not show very well on pictures. There's always the ones that don't look like a superstar on your social media. And then you can tell them, hey, Max in Kennel 3 is going to be a great fit for you. Why don't you go and see that animal instead of looking down, walking down the aisles and say, oh, hey, like that dog looks cute. Because most people pick their animals by cute factors and not personality. So I always say conversational-based adoption processes, a bit like matchmaking services, a bit like Tinder. I just spent the summer in New York, and all I kept on seeing is Tinder ads. Don't ask me why. But anyway, so are you providing the matchmaking services? You're trying to find the best match of the animal and the potential pet owners, and then having positive conversations creates positive experiences. Those adopters are going to be your best advocates when they walk out of the door with Max, who's going to be the perfect pet. And they're going to tell their friends and family when they're looking for a pet that, hey, try the shelter. I had a great experience. They really helped me find this perfect match that I might not have looked at otherwise because there wasn't the cute frou-frou dog that I went in to see. And then the other side of it is show some grace when someone returns a pet. We all know that things happen. No one really and assuming good intentions again, right? No one really go into the shelter to want to adopt a pet, get the pet all the new bed, new toys and stuff, just to want to return it. They really want to make it work. And sometimes things just doesn't work. Okay. It's a bit like, who realistically here end up staying in a long-term relationship or marrying their first boyfriend or girlfriend, right? Like, we'll try things out and then be grateful that they're bringing new information back to you, because we all know that animals in shelters don't show as good as they should be in a home setting. So these folks are actually helping you to be the better matchmaker. And I think, let me see. Okay, moving off adoptions. I see some of my favorite folks here. We're going to talk about fosters and volunteers. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a story about Grand Parish Sheriff's Office. In early 2022, Sheriff McCain, who's sheriff at Grand Parish, reached out to best friends saying that, do you have money? I need to have more cages because I've ran out of space and I really don't want to euthanize all these animals. And then we counter-offered them and said, we have money, but not for your cages. So we pitched to them, telling them that instead of building more cages because you can't shelter your way out of sheltering, why don't you try trusting your community to step up to help you? So at that point in time, when they reached out, Grand Parish, it's a rural, just for perspective, they're a tiny rural parish. Well, not tiny. The holding facility is a tiny tiny facility in a prison system just outside of central Louisiana. And the majority of the dogs I held there are dogs that were running at large in the parish. They have no adoptions, no nothing. So their only way of life outcomes for those animals are returning to owners. And we all know how good, bad return to owners are. Sometimes you're super successful, sometimes you're not. So when they reached out, they were at a safe rate, which is really a return to owner rate of 9.7%. So we told Sheriff McCain, hey, just trust the system, trust us. And he was very brave, he trusted us. And what they end up doing is that we helped them set up a foster program. So within a year, they went from a safe rate from 9.7% to 96%. So that is an 84% increase in life-saving rate in 1 year. And what they have is 150 foster families. So for all those people who say fosters don't work, for all those people who can't recruit fosters, you can't, because a little parish we call them parishes in Louisiana, a little parish in Louisiana made it happen. And how do they do that? Trusting the community, reaching out to the community, being transparent about their needs and saying that, hey, this is what we are at, we need your help. Step up to help us. So from not having adoptions and no real life outcomes, they now have fosters. And this is our very first foster lady with our very first foster dogs. They now have volunteers to run their social media. They have volunteers to do adoption events, both on-site and off-site. They have volunteers to take animals to transport, to medical care, fundraise. Pretty much you name it, the fosters and the volunteers are doing it, apart from the handling of animals right in the shelter. So by using fosters and volunteers and communicating need and opening up for help would help you increase bandwidth for life-saving.
All right. So let's now talk about community cat programs, one of my favorite topics. I mean, it's even in the name, community. Community cat programs are one of the best ways that we can start to build a better relationship with our community, because we are going out into those communities, whether we're returning cats or if we're doing targeted trapping programs. We are regularly having a dialogue with those community members in a way we wouldn't normally. When I think about community cat programs, I think about how it benefits everyone involved. It benefits the cat because they're going back sterilized and vaccinated, so they're living healthier lives because they don't have that reproductive stress on their bodies. And once again, they have those vaccines in place. We're benefiting the caregivers because we're helping the cats, and they love that, especially when they understand what the benefits are. We are providing them with information on how to better provide for those cats, proven feeding practices to once again be those better providers for the cats in our community. And we also are providing them with resources such as spay and neuter resources. Then we have our complainants, and we can benefit them too with this type of programming. Historically, what animal control has done, or animal shelters have done, is we have trapped the cats and permanently removed them. And this didn't solve the problem for anyone because of something called the vacuum effect. When we trap and remove a cat, there are still resources in that area, and there's a certain carrying capacity. So even when we remove a cat, the remaining cats or the cats in surrounding neighborhoods will continue to reproduce, they'll move in, and they'll continue to have those issues. So we want long-term solutions to complainants' issues, which the policymakers love too. And we can do that either through sterilization, or depending on the type of complaint, we may also need to provide information around humane deterrence. But really, the cornerstones of this program is once again providing our community with resources and information to better strengthen that. I think a lot about St. Tammany Parish, which is a shelter that I helped start their community cat program at. When we first started working with them, their save rate for cats was in the mid-50s, and their community perception was at an all-time low. And this is one of the first life-saving programs they put in place. And all this work they had going out into the community, dispelling misinformation, and just creating those stronger bonds, helped them get to the 2 years of consecutive no-kill save rate that they have today. The Community cat coordinator Jessica told me the story about a cat named Cinnamon. The cat had lived in the neighborhood for over 7 years. They had one caregiver who moved out and then another one took over. And one day, Cinnamon, even though she was already fixed, she got sick and she was asocial and they didn't know what to do. They called the shelter and the shelter said, we're gonna help. And they did. And that family and the people in that neighborhood are forever grateful for the care that was provided. And you can see how excited they were to have Cinnamon come back. And those moments and those interactions matter because they told, I'm sure, other people in that community too that experience. So the last type of programming I'm going to talk about is intake diversion. In the video is Morgan Chegwidden with San Angelo Animal Services, and they used to have an intake of 8,000, and they cut it down to 4,000 using intake diversion programs. They also were given a cap by their city manager that they could only have 180 animals in their building. So intake diversion was going to be paramount to life-saving at this shelter. So what they did is a few different things. First, owner retention programs. They focused on managed intakes. So instead of being reactive and letting people bring in their own animals the same day, they made them have appointments, which allowed us to give them better counseling. When we can give people better counseling, we can get down to the specific problem and we can help address it. So by doing so, they were able to keep more pets in their homes. There are also, in cases where the person couldn't keep the pet, they were able to rehome the pet before it had to come to the shelter, avoiding the shelter altogether. They also implemented what they call a Good Samaritan program, and this was to address stray dogs in particular. Most dogs are found within a mile of their home, and there are many reasons why someone may not be able to come to the shelter to reclaim their dog before the stray period is up. They might not have access to transportation. They might work during the hours the shelter is open and not be able to afford a day off. They might not be able to afford the owner reclaim fee, which I would recommend waiving. They might be afraid of their information being taken in by a government entity. The list goes on. But there's a lot of reasons, and we're going to be a lot more successful in reuniting dogs with their owners if we keep them in their community, which is exactly what they found. With all the finders that kept those dogs, a lot of them were able to find their way home, and in cases where they weren't, many of these people were willing to foster. As part of the Good Samaritan program, they provided them with a kit of supplies they would need to foster the dogs for a few days, as well as vaccinate the dog. So in case they had to come back, they already had started that vaccination protocol. Lastly was kitten intake diversion. They had a lot of kittens coming in, so they built an informational campaign with their nonprofit partner to push out information on what to do when you find healthy kittens outside. This greatly reduced the amount of kittens coming in, and they had kitten kits for the remaining. So this really truly demonstrates to me how, when we give to the community, how much it in turn impacts us. Because I mean, going from 8,000 to 4,000 animals coming in, that's a huge difference. And that's a huge difference in time for the rest of the animals in the building, which is why they experienced a 60% reduction in kitten intake this spring when it should be starting at an all-time high. And they have had a 90% save rate all of this year. So to round out today's presentation, there is a video about a volunteer talking about her experience with the community, because I want to just highlight that while we give to the community, they also give so much support back to us. And really the basis of community-based animal sheltering is that alone we can do so little. We talked all about the resource gaps in our community and how that can affect our life-saving programs. But together, we can do so much more, and we can save so many more lives. So thank you all for coming to today's presentation.